Mr. Dannenberger,
Here.
Mr. Santamore. Mr. Muncy,
Here.
Mr. Boyd,
Here.
and Mr. Moore.
Here. And Mr. Mulek did just join the meeting.
And Mr. Mulek.
I am here.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I had one logistical thing to talk to the commission about first. I would like to try to improve for the sake of having an efficient meeting, I'd like to try to have us use the raise hand function and then be recognized by the chair in order to speak or make a motion. I think this will try to help us be a bit more efficient and able to understand who's talking. I think I'm able to identify what order people raise their hand in, so we'll do that this time. And if you forget, it hasn't been what we're doing over the last year and a half. So if anybody forgets, I'll just gently remind you to do that. I'm sure it'll seem a little bit maybe annoying to stop and raise your hand and be recognized, but just want to try to get us in the habit of doing that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
so I have a message that George is muted. Do we have a way to unmute him? I don't see him on here at all.
Yeah, I don't see him.
He's
either.
in the attendees on the side, but I
you able to-
don't have host privileges, so I can't unmute
Okay.
him.
Could we take a brief pause?
Sure. We'll take a pause to get George on the line. I feel comfortable proceeding through the next two agenda items without him, unless we need to. So next item is item 3, public comment. We have not received any public comments, so we'll move this on to number 4, approval of the minutes. Ask for a motion to approve the minutes of last meeting. Mr. Krieger,
I'd move to approve as presented.
I will second that.
Mark, could you use the raise hand function, please? All right. That's the old school raise hand function. Yeah. All right. Moved and seconded. Call the roll.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Mulek,
Yes.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Muncy,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore.
Yes.
you.
Mr. Boyle, are you on the line now? Are you able to hear?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Great.
I'll,
So,
I'll try not to abuse my unmuted status.
all right, that brings us to our regular agenda item. We have one item, which is a public hearing, review, and action on a petition submitted by CFT Developments for legislative site plan review of a new restaurant located at 1901 West Market Street. We have a brief presentation by staff first.
Staff is recommending approval of the site plan with the condition that a traffic demand study supporting the need for additional parking is submitted prior to city council approval. This is just a aerial and street view of the site as it currently exists. The site is about, I believe, 6.7 acres in area off of West Market Street, adjacent to the interstate on-ramp. As you can see in the street view, it's next to or in between a Culver's as well as a Circle K. Much of the adjacent zoning and uses is commercial, generally fast food restaurants with drive-throughs, auto services, and hotels. That's to the south, and to the west. To the east, there's restaurants, auto services, truck stops, and financial services. And then also to the west, there are single-family homes in this R1B area over here. As to the site plan, the petitioner is proposing a drive-through fast food restaurant. The drive-through lane is capable of accommodating, I believe, 15 or at least 15 cars at a time. There are 65 parking spaces proposed, and access would be taken off of West Market Street. In most respects, the site plan as proposed is compliant. It meets or exceeds the standards for bulk requirements. For instance, the floor area ratio is fairly small compared to what the maximum is. There's 6-foot setbacks provided where the minimum is 5 feet, and a 54-foot rear yard setback, which is comprised of, if I can get this to go back, that sort of wooded area to the north. As to the off-street parking and loading, in all respects, it is compliant except for the requested 65 spaces. The code allows for up to a 25% increase over the minimum parking required. The minimum is 48. 25%, I believe, would be 60, and they are requesting 65. So what happens when over that 25% threshold is requested is either the petitioner can request a variance or provide a traffic demand study, depending on interpretation. And staff believes that a traffic demand study would be the best course of action in this case. As to landscaping requirements, everything's compliant here as well. Just a note on traffic demand, IDOT does provide annual traffic counts or annual average traffic counts for different parts of a street. So the section of Market Street here, because of its proximity to the interstate, on a daily basis, this section of Market Street sees 17,300 300 trips on average, which may lend some support to the idea that this location needs more than 25% of the minimum parking. In terms of how this relates to the comprehensive plan, it relates to economic development goal 4, enhancing Bloomington's image as a business-friendly community, specifically prioritizing infill and redevelopment to spur growth and reinvestment in the city, and targeting efforts to improve areas identified in redevelopment areas maps, prioritizing as opportunities are presented. In terms of specifically how this area is classified, it is tier 1 priority infill. I believe it's, yeah, over here. And contemplated by the future land use map as regional commercial. In terms of the findings of fact, the site plan as proposed meets all the criteria with the exception of criterion B, which is contingent on, in staff's view, the receipt of a traffic demand study that supports the need for additional parking. And so if that, staff is recommending approval with the condition that a traffic demand study is submitted prior to city council approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Mr. Boyd?
Traffic demand study, I'm guessing that's counting the traffic along Market Street, and that's what that's based on. Is that correct?
It would be based on the Institute of Traffic Engineers estimates of essentially how much vehicle traffic is generated by similar uses. It may also be based on the data collected at other Panda Express locations and combined with, that ITE data and based on as well the IDOT data that's provided.
If I may, to be clear, it's a parking demand study, not a traffic study.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the reason for my question is I fear, if we're taking traffic that's going along a state highway off of an interstate, I think that they're going to easily see that there's enough cars there to justify it, but I don't know if there's enough cars that are going to be parking in this parking lot to justify it. So that was the reason for my question. So thank you.
Any other questions for staff? I had a follow-up similar to what Mr. Boyd was asking about the parking demand study. So first, that cost is borne by the developer, right? Okay.
Correct.
Do we have an idea about how much that would cost them?
We do not.
Okay. And then let's say it comes back and the parking demand study doesn't seem to warrant the additional spaces. So what happens then? Do they need to redo this plan and then bring it back to Planning Commission? Is that the process to remove those extra? We're talking about 5 spaces, right? 65 versus 60.
Correct.
Right? They could adjust the plan or they could apply for a variance. The problem is meeting the variance criteria may be difficult.
Okay. All right. I think that's all my questions on that. All right, so now I will open up the public hearing portion. We will start with the petitioner. Is someone on the line representing the petitioner?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Could you please state your name and address for the record? And also
My name is Henry Clover. And I'm also the applicant and the architect. I am AC Clover Architects. I'm at 8813 Penrose Lane, Lenexa, Kansas, Suite 400. And very pleased to be before you today.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, you can proceed.
Well, one, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the open staff's presentation was very concise, so I don't need to duplicate a lot of it. Obviously, we're very excited to be in this location and obviously we expect it to do very well based on its location and highway access. The only contention is the parking. It's also a little bit of an unusual site because it's not like a normal site where you're sitting next to a bigger shopping center and a Target. You know, you pull in, you're by the highway, you've got a ditch and a creek on one side and then a gas station on the other side, which people aren't going to go. And then we were also told that there's the residential in behind and we can't access it from behind from the residential. So part of the purpose was to make sure there was not going to be a need for additional parking. We can obviously try the ITE study, but I know in my 40 years of negotiating with traffic engineers and trying to deal with the various things, it's a chart and it comes up with a chart and it says, and they look for something that's as close as possible and they put numbers in and they say that this is going to work. And it's probably unlikely that in this day and age and the date that's out there and the fact that they haven't been updated since COVID, that it's going to work. It's kind of like today saying that, you're going to compare one drive-through restaurant like a Panda to a Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A I've seen have as many as 40 drive-through stacking spaces. I've seen them loop around buildings. So we know that we are concerned about the parking because of its location, because of how it's set up, because we don't want to have anybody parking on the residential and walking through, because that is probably the only place that it would be available, and we did not want that. We are talking about 5 spaces. Panda does want them. They're willing to look at other alternatives like putting in bigger spaces for a bus, for example, or a trailer and that sort of thing. If that would satisfy people, but I am concerned about trying to get an ITE study that would say that in this day and age that you do need the parking, because most people are going the other direction. And so that's part of the reason we didn't initially do it. What they gave you was a study of another store and the amount of traffic it gets, and we're expecting this one to be just as good, because the Joliet is on a highway, right? I think they picked a store that was actually on a highway, and they're showing that they would get from 6:30 to 7:30 over 90 transactions. And right now they have an assessment that about 30% of the traffic goes through it. So they're seeing that in that hour period, there would be 65 transactions. And that is obviously multiple people as well. So that's the primary reason we're concerned. And we're willing to look at alternatives and options and things like that. But we just feel this is a little bit of a special case because of how it's located. You can't really walk to the next parking lot. There's not a bigger shopping center next door. You're on a highway. It's going to get a lot of people to pop in and out really quick and get through the drive-through. We're comfortable with everything else. We think staff did a great job, but that's really the only thing we'd like to discuss and try and figure out a solution, because we don't believe that an ITE study in this day and age will say that we need the parking, but we do feel we need the parking based on our experience with those stores. So that's I'm here to answer any questions you have. I've got a lot of experience with Panda. I've actually been an architect for Panda for 27 or 28 years. And I love them to death because I've worked with them for so long. So happy to answer any questions you have. So.
Smith, did you have a comment?
Yeah, possible clarification.
Yeah.
As well.
Sure.
So just reading the sentence that offers the parking demand study as a way to approve the extra spaces. It seems that there's an inherent in this process, a little bit of flexibility. It's not that there's a particular number or threshold that we have to, that's a hard line.
Right.
So the way it reads is the voluntary provision of off-street parking spaces or loading that exceeds 25% of the requirements in this section may be approved through site plan procedures if a determination is made that such facilities are needed based upon the parking demand study provided by the applicant. So if a determination, so I think some of that wiggle factor lies with the commission. So,
and we can work on and providing the staff with various other information to see what they're comfortable with. The only concern we had was the specific statement then that it needed to be ITE. And I have just found that that's not going to be reflective of the reality in this day and age for something this microcosm. So
it secondarily offers Urban Land Institute as well. So they could build it into the recommendation.
Okay. We're happy to work with staff to try and come up with various methods that they would be acceptable.
Does anyone have any questions for the petitioner? I do have one question. So you mentioned some options like a tractor area or bus
parking.
area. Yeah. So there is some flexibility if we're not going to do this, but just
Right.
wanted to clarify. What I'm hearing from you is that this amount of parking is based on your belief about the use of this area based on other experiences that you've had, as opposed to guidance or tables or standards that might be present elsewhere. Is that what you're?
Yes. And I say it for a reason, because like right now, Chick-fil-A is putting everybody on their heels as to how many drive-through stacking you should have.
Yeah.
And that's reality. That's not some book. That's not some chart. So.
Yeah. And this isn't a place where if there's some overflow, people can easily park on the side of the road outside of it or something like that. You're very limited just to this area, right?
I don't think we or the city want that. So that would be very dangerous. So.
Right. My understanding is that there is no one else who has signed up to speak in the hearing. Check on that. Okay, there's no one here physically, so I will close the public hearing. And I will open up conversation amongst the commission. I'm curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts about adjusting this recommendation or how this requirement applies to the situation. Anyone have any thoughts to offer? Yeah, Mr. Boyd.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago we set the parking standard in the update, and we did so with a spirit that we were going to try to go with the trend that we're seeing across the country of parking, creating that parking maximum instead of the parking minimum, that kind of philosophy. And I'm concerned that this is the first case that we've seen, in my memory, since that happened. And I'm concerned of giving leeway to that over 5 spaces. That's where my mind's at today. I don't want to set a precedent that we can come in and make a change for 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces after we went through a lot of work and a lot of discussion and a lot of public input to put our standards where they are today.
Anyone else have any? Mr. Stanzik?
Yeah, it occurs to me we're dealing with a petitioner here who is not new to this game, and he seems to have a pretty significant amount of experience with parking requirements. And I guess I'm kind of viewing his experience with parking requirements contrasted with our new venture into this area of maximum requirements. And I'm comparing all that with the cost of the parking demand study. And I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with forcing him to go through all that.
I would accept a motion that adjusts the. I'm interested if someone's willing to make an emotion to accept the. Sorry, I'm getting the language in front of me. Interested if someone wants to remove the parking requirement, the parking study requirement from this. So yeah, gosh, I lost my pages here. There we go. Thank you. So I'm interested if someone would be interested in making the motion on the second bullet, but without the parking requirement.
I think my hand's still up. I would so move.
Okay. So I'll just let me just state if this is the motion to recommend this city council. Sorry, I guess we should do findings of fact first. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest.
Yep. So first, I'd entertain a motion to establish the findings of fact that the subject property meets the legislative site plan criteria of city code. Mr. Krieger.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Stanzik. Okay. Any
And that
discussion
would
on
be
that?
including, Tyson, that would be including the the extra spaces or not?
So
For that condition.
I don't believe the findings of fact. The findings of fact are just conditional that it would be met if the parking
Yeah.
study
Okay, and the
was
findings of
done.
fact you're referencing then are the ones that are the findings made in the staff memorandum.
In staff memorandum. Yeah.
Okay.
So that includes that standard B is contingent upon the findings of the demand study. But I don't think that locks us into requiring that. I believe we can do that with the second motion.
Mhm.
So,
Mr. Chairperson?
Yeah.
Could I ask George to just clarify, the way I read this, they can do the parking demand study or they have to have a variance. And where the flexibility is on whether or not if we determine that the demand study is okay. And there's another section of the code basically gives suggestions. It's not that, it doesn't say the degree to which it has to be done. I don't know that we're talking about a full-blown expensive study. It's sort of a review of what the needs are. Here's what these charts say, basically what he is saying in his testimony. But, just
So
wanna make-
would you, Kim, so for like clarification, you're saying that if the commission wishes, they may find that the Joliet information that was testified to by the applicant may be sufficient to meet the requirement for a demand study?
No, I'm saying that the parking demand study is a requirement in the ordinance, but I'm not sure the commission can waive. But you could say, well, at this point, you'd have to allow us some flexibility to accept that demand study, say that we agree with it, and then move it on to council. And if you wanted to still see that, it'd have to be continued to the next meeting. But that's what I wanted George to weigh in on. I want to be careful. I don't think we can altogether waive the requirement for one or the other.
George, based on your understanding of this provision, would the traffic demand letter that they provided meet the requirements, or the parking demand? Parking demand study letter that they included meet the requirements?
The only requirement that I'm aware of was the one that Kim read, and I don't think it's mandated the kind that was referred to in the staff report. Having said that, I will, there may be something that requires that particular report. I'm not aware of it. If staff is, that it has to be from that institute, then, perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know if that's
yeah,
helpful.
so
I'm saying I think that there is room for interpretation, and perhaps, staff or the commission could find out that it's met on the basis of either the applicant's knowledge and or the Joliet, information provided. Having said that, I'm just saying, I see in the staff report there was a specific reference to a specific type of report, and I may be missing something, but I don't see that specific type of report is required.
okay, so right now where we're sitting mechanically is we have a motion on the floor to accept the findings of fact that are in the packet. Caitlin, could you move us to where that, to we see a letter B for that? Okay, so that includes this statement B here. And this is stating that the proposal additional fill is contingent upon findings of the traffic demand study. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what our authority is here. That's a requirement in the code that be performed, but there's flexibility in how we would interpret what a traffic demand study entails.
Yeah, one last clarification. I'd rather get it right now. And we all keep saying traffic, we mean parking.
Yep.
The section it's referred to in this is for George too, that is referred to in the memo is 12.8. And that also uses the word may. And it gives further explanation on what they mean by parking demand study. And it says may require submittal of independent parking demand study that analyzes parking demand based on parking generation standards of the ITE or Urban Land Institute. So may is further flexibility. So
Okay.
maybe you can work with what you have if George agrees.
Yeah, I think May does give us that flexibility.
Okay. So then I think we could, I see you guys raising your hands. I'll get to you just a moment. I just want to be clear what we're talking about. So it seems like it is within our ability then to amend this to say that the information that's been gathered is sufficient to meet that. And so then B would not be contingent anymore. We could we could amend the motion to say that it's no longer contingent upon that. So, Mr. Boyd, I see you raising your hand on and off. Any assistance
Yeah,
here?
I started having a question and then I think it's answered and I think of another one. So sorry. The motion that is made for the findings of fact, a yes vote on that motion. Are we agreeing? What are we agreeing to with that in regards to the parking study specifically?
Yeah, I think as it's written right now, how I would interpret it is that we would still be saying that the approval of the site plan would be contingent upon the findings of the parking demand study.
Okay, so we're not in any way by voting yes on the findings of fact waiving the need for a parking study.
At this point, that wouldn't be how I would interpret the motion. I think
Okay.
it would need to be amended in order to have that occur. So,
And by
go ahead.
and I'm sorry, and by so the motion for the findings of fact, can we pass those while excluding item B, or is that not needed?
You'd have to make an amendment to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Stanzik?
Yeah, I'm not wanting to complicate this thing any more than we need to, but I guess I was reading the situation different from Mr. Boyd. It looks to me like the B is just setting the standard as the extent to which the proposal minimizes adverse impact, but the parking demand study looked to me like that was something that the staff added as a means of allowing that standard to be met. And if we're looking at deleting the traffic study, it looks to me like we would just be disagreeing with the staff as to whether the traffic study is necessary to meet that standard. So that if we came up with a finding that the standards are met without reference to the parking study, then we have in effect dispensed with it and just made a determination that the findings are all met. The standards are all met.
Mr. Boyd?
Yeah, that's actually how I interpreted it, which is why I asked the question. I want to make sure if a vote for yes, I want to make sure a vote for yes is not voting to waive a parking study. And that is how I interpret that. And so I want to make sure that that's correct.
Yes, at this time, a yes vote would be still saying that the standard B is met contingent upon the study.
Contingent upon, or that we no longer, because I think that's where I'm getting turned up. So a yes vote on the findings of fact is saying that we would still need a study. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I'd read it.
I was
Mr.
reading it just
Stanzik?
the opposite way.
And I was too, Mr. Stanzik.
Perhaps the best way would be to withdraw the motion and then make another motion that clarifies this. Mr. Stanzik, are you going to withdraw your motion?
I think I just seconded the motion.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
If Tom
This is
wants to
Tom.
withdraw it, I'll withdraw my second.
Mr. Krieger?
I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, all right. So we're back now. We're clear. We don't have a motion on the floor. Ms. Kelly, you wanted to say something?
Can I suggest, and George, correct me if this is misguided, but maybe voting on the standards individually?
Well, I was thinking maybe what you could do is perhaps we could vote on everything other than B, and because I don't know that the only seems to be the one that's at issue.
Yep.
So perhaps we could see if there's a motion to accept all the standards other than B, and then proceed to discuss B.
Mr. Boyd?
Yeah, I'll make that motion that we approve the standards minus B.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Stanzik. Any discussion? Okay, we'll vote.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Mulek,
Yes.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Muncy,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. So now we have to deal with number B. So a potential motion here to clarify it would be to make a motion, but to adjust the wording that is present here. I would think at a minimum, a motion should adjust the wording to call it a parking demand study instead of a traffic demand study, to be clear on that point. But I'm interested if there's a motion to move forward with this. So it could either be a motion to accept it as written, I guess, changing traffic to parking, if you believe that the parking study should still be done. If someone was to make a motion to remove the requirement for the parking, then you could move to accept it, except removing the last sentence and just saying that the standard is met. Mr. Stanzik?
Yeah, I would move that we delete the last sentence from the recommendation so that the standard B could be approved without the parking study.
We have a second. Mr. Muncy?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
So any discussion on that, Mr. Boyd?
Yeah, I mean, just to repeat some of my thoughts from before, real quick, we're talking about 5 spaces, and I understand the insignificance that may sound. However, with the time input that we put into when we went through the rezoning and the code, to really set a standard of how we want our community to look over the next several generations. So to have the first case come in front of us and say, make an exception because of 5 spaces, I think sets a really ugly precedent moving forward. And quite frankly, if they come back with a study that shows that these 5 spaces are going to be critical to their business, then they can present that to council, and that's a fair way to go about it. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm saying I'm going to need proof to be different from what we have agreed upon prior to this. So I'll be voting no on that motion.
Any other discussion? I'll just offer that I'll be voting yes. I think Mr. Boyd's points are very well taken. When I look at this particular spot, I don't see that reducing the 5 spots will create any more useful space. Things are very constricted in this location, and there's already pavement there. And I don't think it's necessarily to the benefit of the city to have additional space here. And there's also the risk of having overflow parking without anywhere to go in this particular spot. So in general, I am in favor of less parking, but it seems sufficient to me in this case. So just to be clear, a vote of yes, we'll be voting to approve the finding of fact for B as you can see on your screen, but with the last sentence removed and replaced with the standard is met. So we'll vote on that.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Mr. Mulek,
Yes.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Muncy,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
No.
and Mr. Moore.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. We are now on to the second motion. Given our discussion just now, what I would entertain was a motion to recommend that City Council approve the legislative site plan review for a new restaurant in the B1 General Commercial District for the property located at 1901 West Market Street. That would be the entire motion. Mr. Krieger. Need to unmute. Mr. Krieger.
What's that?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were.
No, I saw move.
Oh, you move. Okay. Moved by Mr. Krieger. Seconded. Aye.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Stanzik. Any discussion?
Is the motions what's on the screen minus the last bullet point?
Yes. Ending after Ward 7.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no more discussion. We'll move to vote.
Mr. Krieger,
Yes.
Muley,
Yes.
Mr. Stanzik,
Yes.
Mr. Dannenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Muncy,
Yes.
Mr. Boyd,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
carries.
Okay, it carries. And do we know when that will go to city council? If not, that's okay.
One second, I'm pulling up the spreadsheet.
July 28th. Okay, July 28th.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate it.
Or I'm sorry, that's not correct. July
Right, right.
26th, on Monday.
July 26th. Okay. All right, we'll now move on to item 6, old business. There's none on the agenda. Item 7, new business. Does anyone have a new business to bring forward? Seeing none, I ask for a motion on item 8. Oh, Mr. Krieger.
I would move to adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Boyd, I assume.
Got it.
All in favor, give a thumbs up. Thanks, everybody.
Want to see that in the minutes.